And when I moved to New York in college, I was just really amazed at the level of diversity that I saw everywhere I went except in the theater. So after I finished school and had worked at different places and was thinking about what new perspectives would be, one of the first things that I felt was really important was that we had to have a level of diversity that reflected the city that we were all living in. And so our mission became, in terms of support for new play development, to put an emphasis on works by women and writers of color. Not that we wanted to exclude anybody, but that my belief is that theater's primary job is to teach us something about ourselves. Yes, we want to be entertained, we want to like what we see, but it's got to teach us something, and we can't learn who we are as Americans if all the voices aren't at the table.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a white theater. So, is there enough of a Native American theater? Is there an Asian, enough of an Asian voice, enough of African American? Like, in America, we have a tendency to sort of, like, talk about a melting pot. You know, it's a lot of talk. They teach us this in history classes in school, like we live in a democracy and everything's fair, and you pull yourself by the bootstraps and you might get George Washington Carver, and you might get a little bit of Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass maybe. At least you see his picture, you don't really know what he really did. You know? So if we don't have a theater that tells the stories from the perspective of Black people, I'm not sure that the country is able to tell the story from fairly if it's not coming from the voice. I went to a high school that I was bused to, and so people were sort of like figuring out what to do, like with the Black kid, you know, in the plays. Like, is he gonna kiss the girl? Is that gonna be a problem? Like, we already have problems with the kid at school. Like, what do we do casting? How do we, you know, he's decent enough as an actor, so like, what do we do? Black drama anthology gave me a whole vocabulary of...
And this is
one of Mr. King's books. So that gave me a whole vocabulary to work from that did not, if that theater didn't exist, then that level of the story may not have been told.
Anybody in this room?
We need Black theater now more than ever.
You think more than ever now?
More than ever, no doubt about it, because it was to a certain degree taken away from us somewhere in the 80s, and that entails a lot of other things. Yeah. But you always need theater of a particular race of people, because they're the only ones that can tell their story. So you need Black theater. When I say you need Black theater now more than ever, is because years ago when we started, it was the most popular thing going, and the funding was great, and everything was going. I mean, it was like that was the good old days. This is that Black theater is struggling now, and it's because the funding went to the white theaters. It came a time when I think the politicians thought they were doing the right thing when they said, okay, we're gonna, the white theaters can't get funding from the NEA unless they do Black work. So they said, fine, and they do one Black play a season, and we don't get the funding that we used to get. So it's even now it's more relevant than ever, I think.
You know, if you look at the resident professional theaters around the country, you look at the off-Broadway theaters and the major nonprofit theaters, whether it's Lincoln Center, Roundabout, Manhattan Theater Club, New York Shakespeare Festival, Atlantic Theater Company, and Manhattan Class Company, these theaters may do one play every 5-6 years. They may discover and define a Black play. But I don't think you're going to see that Black play done in any Black theater in America. It's because it's a discovery where in most of the cases, the theme piece is we are creators of our own victimization. We are the creators, so that is very relevant, whether we are dealing with writers for the New York Post like Sewell or Skip Yates, It's an appeasement to make white audience comfortable. August Wilson was, in a sense, discovered by Lloyd Richards. Lloyd Richards was a major influence for almost 50 years in the American theater. Lloyd Richards had Yale University. Okay, so if you do a play at Yale, it's an imprint that it's okay. Okay, now, whether it's Robert Brustein, who was the former dean of Yale, or whether it is Lloyd Richards, who now controls that, when August Wilson broke into the scene, controlled that because Lloyd had the ear of the president of Yale. Okay, the critical establishment going to Yale to say this is a bad play is like going to the bank on Sunday and saying, "Can I have some money?" You know what I mean? You cannot.
Put that stamp on it.
Yeah, that stamp of approval. So Lloyd did that 5 plays in a row. Okay, so the rest of the country, in a sense, bought into that. So I think, and I don't want to talk too long on this, so I think that what we need is, whether it's at the New York Shakespeare Festival, whether it is at Lincoln Center, you need a person, a black person working there who picks the black plays. You need a woman working there who picks the plays for women. You need an Asian or Hispanic, because very few theaters are going to get $600,000 to do a play nonprofit.
We certainly don't get that.
Well, we will take donations. A check.
So,
versus an
getting back to the question, we need black theater more than ever.
When I'm asked a question like that, I have to remind myself that the African American, Caribbean American has been enslaved in this country for far longer than it has been so-called freed. And I think it's very important to look at that. You know, if you go to jail for 10 years, when you come out, how long does it take for you to adapt, to readjust, and for everyone else to readjust to your freedom? So that's one thing that's very important. The other thing is, even though this country is the melting pot, and we might talk about all the other wonderful ethnic groups and cultures that make up our society, it is the African Americans who were enslaved in this country that built this economy. And it was the hundreds of years of free labor that is responsible to the wealth that we all, well, it's some, it's imperceptible. That is another very important factor, because I think of any other group, if we go to the history books, and I used to be a public school teacher, and I remember even of recent how devoid current history books are of the true complex, very layered history of enslavement, which is very complex and very layered. And today, right now, if you look at our history books in the schools, of course there have been changes, there have been advancements. It still does not reflect the true history. So in order to understand American history, American culture, American society, it is vital to understand the African American history. You cannot fully understand America without understanding it, because America was founded on the free labor and the backs of the slaves. So, is black theater, particularly what's going on now? Absolutely. When black people are one of the few people, not necessarily the most economically even repressed or oppressed, but is one of the few people that do not own or control their own culture. When a people do not own and control their own culture, they are not free. There are ethnic groups that are less advanced than black people as a whole in this country, financially less, but they have more control of their culture. So there's a spiritual freedom or enslavement that still exists. So it behooves everyone for to understand the African American story. I do mainly regional theater. I perform for 95% white audiences, even in cities that are over 50% African American. And most of the plays that I do, many which are, well, I do all kind of plays, but I do a lot of black plays, but they are generally either directed by someone white, certainly the dramaturg is white, the costume is white, all the creative team are white people. And in an idyllic society, that would be fine. But when the tables are turned, I can't tell your story. I mean, a good director should be able to direct anything, granted. But when, I've been in plays where I had to hold my breath because there was a drumming, the director said, oh, just get a bongo. Not understanding that a particular kind of drum reflects a certain kind of rhythm, a certain culture, a certain tribe, that also brings about certain spiritual things. And so no, a bongo does not work. It has to be a djembe, or else you'll be calling up the wrong spirits. It's a lack of understanding of.
You know what though, there's also this dumbing down of our culture. It's like, I always look at like Cosby, post-Cosby, like suddenly, like black actors were starting to work a lot more. I remember when I was a kid, like, we'd run home like when somebody black was on TV. I remember when I was a kid seeing you on TV going, I ran home to see you too. You know what I mean? Like, so our culture now also, generally does not value story. Like it sort of values that there's a dumbing down in our culture too that sort of says, well, if there's a black story, let's like put it on BT, or let's put a film and make sure there's some gangsters in it.
But it's not
like
just the
shot.
black
But
culture,
But
it's the
because-
dumbing down of America.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
because we're talking about
It's
black
because we were
theater,
talking about black theater.
when you talk about when things get dumbed down, we get retarded down. We don't just get dumbed down. You can watch some films and there's not one redeeming black character in that whole film. Do you know what I mean? Like you even audition for that stuff and you're like, wow, like I gotta really search for like the humanity of this character.